Hi everyone, this is Kyra from Tyre Heights. We're really excited to get our presentation started today. The chat function is open, so if anyone can tell me where you're from, you can drop how you're feeling in the chat, what you ate for dinner, whatever you want. Just want to say hi and hop on. So feel free to use the chat just to say hello or just drop in, and we will get started in a few. I'm from Atlanta, so if anyone's in Atlanta, hello. Okay, chat is disabled. All right, that. Okay. All right, so the chat is disabled, so you can put where you're from in the question and answer form. From Ohio, awesome. And we're gonna get started about 1 more minute, just waiting for more people to trickle in. And while we're getting started, I want you to start thinking about the importance of voting and what voting means to you. We're gonna have a really great session on voting. And hello, Patricia. Hi, Nicola. Missouri, awesome. Right, we're gonna go ahead and get started. So, as I told you, my name is Kyra. You may have seen me last week or the week before, being the MC. Thank you guys for coming. I am the program and political organizer here at Higher Heights. Higher Heights, if you don't know who we are, welcome. Higher Heights is a national organization, and we've been the political home for Black women for about the past 13 years. We're dedicated to electing more progressive Black women at the federal and state-wide levels, as well as the 100 most populated cities in the US. We empower Black women to run, vote, and win in their communities. And Higher Heights has many ways for you to engage and grow in your political leadership. Whether you're interested in volunteering, entering the first steps to run for office, or getting clear on voting rights, we got you covered. So this is our third installment of our 2025 training, and so far we've covered equity building with our program and political director Jay Brandon in civics. That was me last week. And utilizing these tools will help you with the skills you need to apply. And what we'll cover in this next session on voting rights and restoration. So if you think about it this way, we gave you insight on how to build equity and utilize your leadership for success. And then we also told you who to talk to and how to make it happen. And now we're giving you your why. Voting rights are under attack like never before, and even leaders that we support are getting hit hard through gerrymandering and redistricting. Which leads me to introduce you to our trainer, Ashley Shannon, Esquire, and she will help you. She's going to guide you through voting rights and how to protect the sacred right to vote. I'm so excited for this next session. It's needed now more than ever. Introducing Ashley Shannon. Oh, Ashley, we're trying to having some technical difficulties here. 1 second. Um, you guys can still put where you are coming from in the chat. Oh, there she is. Hi, Ashley.
Okay, you can hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Ashley Shannon. I'm an attorney. My focuses are mainly criminal justice, civil rights, and legislative advisement. I worked on both political campaigns in terms of elections, as well as a lot of policy reform across the nation. I specifically wanted to talk from someone in the borderline Gen Z and millennial range, but also as a Black woman on the importance of voting rights in our country, which is why I am speaking to you all today, especially regarding the attacks on our democracy. And I hope you enjoy my video training.
Awesome. We're going to go ahead and get started and launch into the video.
around the country. Traveling around the country from Arizona to Milwaukee to Kentucky, teaching young people, law students, current attorneys about voting rights, how to protect elections, as well as how to just get out on the streets and be a grassroots activist as well. All of that work has led me to working with people like the family of Ahmaud Arbery, Ben Crump, and others. And through our activism, we have pushed entire policies and movements, and that's why I advocate for voting rights.
Amazing.
Voter suppression is in a nutshell is anything that prevents an individual or community from voting, anything that stops it, right? So that could be as simple as forms of voter dilution. So let's say you have a community of like 100 people, right? And 60 of those people in that community are Black and the other percent make up various other races, right? When you take that majority of Black people, you are predicting that they're likely going to vote in a certain way, right? But when gerrymandering practices come into play, which is when we are creating the lines on a map and we're separating who votes in what district, what congressman they vote for, what judge they vote for, when we are looking at gerrymandering lines, those gerrymanders, if they are discriminatory, could split entire districts. So they're going to take those 60 people that make up the majority of a community and they're going to say, we don't want your vote to matter. So instead, we're going to take those 60 people, put 30 in District 1, 30 in District 2. So you all are no longer the majority, you're actually the minority, meaning your vote has now been what we call diluted. And you're going to start thinking, why does it matter? Why do I show up to the polls? Voter suppression can also look like any form of policy that prevents someone from voting, right? So saying that every single year you have to re-register to vote. Well, you thought you re-registered this year to vote. You show up to the poll, a poll worker tells you you're not actually registered. You know you're registered, but they tell you you're not. And so instead, they offer you a different form of a ballot and they say, fill out this type of ballot. It's not the normal one, it's a different ballot. Fill this out and we'll see if your vote counts later. And you know that the chances of that vote counting are limited. Anything that prevents you from voting, anything that could suppress it to divert you from wanting to participate in elections, or that could compromise why you show up to the polls, that is voter suppression. If you look at the policies in play right now, there are a lot of attacks, not just on the Black community, but on Black women specifically when it comes to voting practices, right? Let's take, for example, what's been happening in areas like Georgia. So you're standing in line, you want to stand there, you want to go in and vote. Lines for some known reason, unknown reason, are about an hour long, right? You're standing there, it starts to rain. Somebody who's not in line, a nonprofit worker, comes over and they say, hey, let me hand you an umbrella. Because as Black women, we don't want our hair to get wet, right? My natural getting wet is enough to make me want to go home and not stand in the line. Me being, let's say about our community, predominantly the ones being diabetic, me not having food for over an hour, access to water, that's enough to make me want to go home. As we see in areas such as Georgia or in Alabama, giving something like an umbrella to someone standing in line waiting to vote, even if over an hour, which is still a form of voter suppression, giving food, a slice of pizza to someone standing in line, that is a policy that people are working against to keep especially Black women out of the voting booth. Anything from those areas become microaggressions. They're intentional, though not on its face looking to everyday Americans like forms of voter suppression or microaggressions. To us, the ones that care about those little things, that matters to us. That prevents us from wanting to participate in elections because it becomes harder and harder for us to as well. We also see that in recent years, in the Fifth Circuit as well as Eighth Circuit, right? So we're talking judicial districts. We've seen major forms of policy that have acted as voter suppression. What do I mean by that? In the Eighth Circuit specifically, they decided that recently, organizations that we know have been those grassroots activists holding up signs, marching in the streets like the ACLU, Black Voters Matter, NAACP, These have been organizations that have stood at the forefront for our community for decades. And those organizations used to bring cases for us. So when I have been blocked in voter suppression and I've not been allowed to vote, or my vote has been suppressed, or I did vote and I'm later being told my vote did not count, when gerrymandering lines are diluting voters' voices, those organizations usually stood up, went to court, and say, we're going to fight you for these people. Well, in the Eighth Circuit recently, they decided that those organizations can no longer bring cases for individuals. Now, if the individual can't bring a case on their own, especially due to finances and inequity, if the organizations cannot bring those cases of litigation to attack voter suppression, who do we leave to do it? So recently, the Department of Justice has decided that they would be the ones to bring those type of cases to fight voter suppression in districts. Why does this matter? We see the current administration has no intent to go after voter suppression. And so all of this that was happening in the Eighth Circuit leading up to the current administration is evident that if we can't leave it to these organizations to go to court for us, then how do we believe the Department of Justice is going to go to court for us? They won't. And so voter suppression is going to keep happening and keep spreading because there's no one there, there's no block to stop it. And so that affects us as Black people, but especially as Black women, because as these practices of voter suppression keep going and these little policies and these microaggressions are being created every day to keep us out of the polls, no one is there, whether it be holding our hand or fighting for us to stop these forms of suppression. And I think now we're going to see, even though there are areas of policy that obviously affect Black people and Black women, we're going to see us questioning, why do we show up at all? And that's going to minimize our overall vote. Now more than ever, we see that democracy is falling. Let's be honest. Democracy is the ability for everyone's voice to matter. It doesn't matter what color you are. It doesn't matter how tall you are, how big you are, how small you are, what job you work. Everyone's voice matters. Everyone is important to the sustainability of America, which used to be what? This melting pot where we believed everyone's voice and story could be heard. Well, if democracy falls, everything else falls. That means education falls. That means small business and large business ownership falls. That means access to healthcare falls. That means elderly assistance falls. That means opportunity falls. What I think people don't quite understand at times is democracy has been a byproduct of us dismantling systematic oppression, right? What is systematic oppression? It's a form of system that has been created to minimize, just like voter dilution, right? To minimize the voice of whether it be Black people, of women, of those with disabilities in certain areas, right? When we see over time that systematic oppression is able to push forward, that means that the opportunities to break through those glass ceilings that we used to see when it came to being a CEO, a president, vice president, those opportunities start going away. If democracy does not mean everyone matters, then they stop mattering in every space we have. Schools that used to be separate but equal come back into play. Schools that were never equal at all. Healthcare is only beneficial and affordable to the majority that is able to afford that 1% of living, right? Small businesses stop mattering because large businesses, whether it be Microsoft, Google, Meta, those will take over. They're getting the large contracts. They're giving the government bids. The mom and pop flower shop down the street stops mattering. The porch grandma that used to hand out candy for 10 cents, she stops mattering. When democracy falls, every business, every form of education, healthcare, everything else starts falling as well. It becomes unaffordable to live in America. It becomes harder to stay. And it becomes like we're going back into a position of every day we're living paycheck to paycheck, right? Which some of us are already doing, let's be honest. We're living paycheck to paycheck, trying to survive rather than live. And that is the biggest threat to democracy falling as well. When you ask Black people in this country why
you go to work every day, why you start small businesses, why you do what you do. Outside of passion and talent, what is the normal answer? I want to create generational wealth. Wealth is not limited by how much my grandma hid under the mattress or how much I have in the bank account. Wealth is the accumulation as well as the sustainability of ownership in this country and around the world. What do I mean by that? Let's say you own a home. And that home has been an investment property for you, but you know you want to pass down this home to your kids, the rest of your family. You want your friends to come over for Thanksgiving. This home is a form of ownership, a stake in the game. And you know that this is your ability to, whether it be turn it into an Airbnb someday or pass it down to your family so your kids never have to worry about where they're living. That is generational wealth. But wealth can be limited when it's not sustainable. So as the ground breaks or the gravel breaks and the sidewalk breaks in front of your home and nobody shows up to fix it because nobody cares about the black people living on your block, the predominantly black people living on your block, that was a form of voter suppression. That is a product of the fact that somebody didn't show up to the poll because they didn't see showing up mattering, right? And so they didn't have the sidewalk fixed because the city didn't rule that your street really mattered. There are people that want to own, that want to create wealth in this country, but they don't show up to the polls where their wealth matters. You want your children to receive a proper education, but you didn't show up to the polls. And so the school board, who are elected officials as well, the school board has voted that your school didn't need iPads, but the school down the street, right, needed those iPads. Your school that has had, let's say, about a 21 ACT did not need certain resources, but the school up the road that has an average ACT of about a 24 or higher, they needed these resources because they're a little bit better than you all. When we don't show up, we don't create sustainable wealth. Wealth is not limited by how much we have in our pockets, or once I found a home, I owned the home, I did my part, I exceeded the bounds of black people in America. No, that's no longer generational wealth. It's creating a community that is sustainable to make sure my kids and their kids and their kids' can grow up in an area that is profitable, manageable, habitable, and successful for them. It's helping our families see long term that they should show up to the polls because the ways in which voting can impact them, impact their finances, their resources, their accessibility, that matters. People are fighting every single day in suburb areas because they're seeing that a lot of these mental health institutions are being put in suburbs, right? Or you have areas such as like these big state farm corporations or these big factories come and they insert themselves in certain communities. They give jobs out. They stay for about 2 to 3 years and then they ship everybody out and the entire community falls. The resources fall because that has been wealth because we own the homes in the area, but we have not created sustainable wealth because we have not taught communities how to work together to thrive through their own election of people from that community, from showing up to town halls to vote on how do I get my sidewalk fixed, from showing up to school board meetings and advocating for your children and against banned books and access to education. That is the leeway to sustainable wealth. And so if you want to create sustainable generational wealth, you have to meet me at the polls because owning a home is no longer the only form of wealth our community has to seek. So when issues of voter suppression show up, there are several avenues on who to call. It's sometimes we just don't know who to call, what to do, and we feel a little bit stuck, but you're not alone. So this is what you do. If you are showing up to the polls on day of and you are trying to vote and somebody, whether it be they're telling you you get there at 6:55 and they're saying I'm not letting you in even though the polls close at 7 o'clock in your area, if you're standing in line and something weird is happening, if you did go vote but something weird happened in there, any form of what you would think is suppression or illegal or that's not quite right. First thing you can do is hit national hotlines. That's going to be election protection centers. So Google their phone number. It's going to be organizations like the Transformative Justice Coalition. Those all have hotlines you can call for immediate assistance. But all of those groups also have attorneys. Attorneys are going to fight for you even when the polls are closed and the election is quote unquote over, right? So if you had issues with voting or an election worker or even questions, you can call those people. But long term, let's say you want to fight something in court, but you don't have the finances or resources to do it, you call the ACLU. You call the Transformative Justice Coalition. You call the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. Those organizations, a simple hotline number, they're going to pick up for you. But who do we hold accountable long term? Those are going to be your senators. And trust me, they have to pick up the phone. That's going to be the clerk of the entire city, right? They're going to have to pick up the phone as well. Those people have been elected to fight for you. And when they don't fight, what do? We kick them out their seat. That is why your voice matters. Because long term, if they can't help me solve the problem at the poll, I'm going to hold them accountable for it later. So that's what you can do then. Now, if you have questions about where am I registered to vote? Am I registered to vote? Simple questions like that, that's something we can take care of way ahead of time. And you can share that resource with anyone you know. It can be as simple as using the League of Women Voters. They have their own website, vote.org. They have their own website where you can see if you're registered to vote. Those are helpful tools. But also if you're a person and let's say English may not be your first language, or you may have a learning disability and you need assistance, you are guaranteed and you have a right to that type of assistance when you show up to the poll and beforehand in order to vote or do a mail-in ballot. So make sure you are using organizations, not just individuals living on the block with you, but organizations to help you fill out that information. And all of those that I named are interconnected and they can connect you to the next resource and the next resource, but definitely start with vote.org. And after that, use all of those organizations I listed to help with further litigation. Okay. Let me tell you a form of voter suppression that people do not know about. And that is once an individual has been incarcerated, whether it be in jail, which is pre-conviction, or prison post-conviction, or during parole once they're released, right, but still in the system, just under watch, no one knows if they are allowed to vote, how to restore the right to vote. So you lost the right and you're trying to get it back. No one knows up from down, right from left. Why is that? In every jurisdiction, so every state, every community across the country, there are, believe it or not, different rules for how you get your right back to vote after you've been incarcerated, or if you even get that right back at all. In some jurisdictions, you lose the right to vote once you're incarcerated, whether that's jail or prison. You never get that right restored to vote again. Some areas, you may lose it due to jail or prison, and you get the right back, but you have to pay off every court fee, every fine you owe, every form of restoration before you get that right back. Some areas, you lose the right, but the governor has to sign off on you getting that right restored. And in some areas, you can become incarcerated, never lose the right to vote in jail, but you may lose it in prison, and then you're released and the right is automatically restored. People are afraid that have been incarcerated, are afraid to show up to polls or to even register to vote because, believe it or not, it is actually illegal in many jurisdictions to show up, think you have the right to vote, you've been formally incarcerated, try to register to vote or try to vote, and then you were actually wrong because you didn't have that right. You could actually be found in violation of parole and be sent back to prison if you make a mistake such as that. That's scary territory for us as a community, especially, but for any individual that has been incarcerated to experience. Because there's a threat to going back. What good is it to show up to vote if I could possibly be incarcerated if I get the process wrong, right? And so people don't want to show up. But in certain areas, such as Chicago, Illinois, you have groups like Chicago Votes that still go in jails. They explain the right to vote. They educate communities on voting, and they tell you whether or not you have the access to voting as well. You have groups like that, but as an entire community, that is a threat to us. That is a form of voter suppression. There has been a woman recently incarcerated because she thought she had the right to vote. She did not, and she was incarcerated because she just tried to vote. That is a threat against us. And so knowing that there are individuals that may or may not be able to vote in our community because of previous incarceration or current incarceration, we have to show up for them. I don't think people understand we elect judges. The same judges that locked up Pookie and them down the street is the same judges we can keep in their seat or kick out. Those same congressmen that created laws against our own people, that did not invest in our communities, that did not invest in our children, so we create a school to prison pipeline, those same people we can kick out of their seat. The families of people such as George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, these families have held liable entire states attorneys' offices, prosecutors' offices, and have held them accountable. Why is that important? We elect those people. Your state's attorney is elected. The same people, imagine that, the same people that incarcerate you or led to your incarceration are elected, even down to the sheriff. From the judge to the sheriff to the prosecutor, and you can elect all of them and you don't show up to the poll. But how many of us, especially in the Black community, have been affected by the criminal justice system? And if not ourselves, we are connected to someone, friend, family member, connected to those individuals, but we don't show up to vote. If it truly means something for us as a community to fight back against the criminal justice system where there's lacking justice at all, the only form of justice, the only form of equity we can truly succeed with is to show up and vote, because that's going to be the loudest voice we have. We don't show up just when things get bad. We don't just show up to the courtroom when the drug case is going up for discussion. We don't just show up when we're bargaining the plea deal. We beat them to the courtroom, and that's at the voting poll. Yeah, I definitely think there are a couple organizations you can always turn to learn more about voting rights. That is going to be probably the Transformative Justice Coalition. That's also going to be Black Voters Matter, the Advancement Project, and the National Women's Law Center. Those are going to be prominent organizations that not only talk about voting rights, but how they affect Black people as well. Now, I'm not big on podcasts or social media when it comes to these type of topics. A lot of what I do starts from the heart, but what I will tell you is if you are looking into getting into grassroots activism, follow your favorite politicians and then go through their following, see who they follow. Go to the Jasmine Crockett's pages, go through the AOC, go through the Robin Kellys, go through all of these people's social media sites, look at who they're following, because that is who they usually use as advisors for policy when they're approaching this type of work. And those groups are going to be the ones that are going to be having the grassroots activism on the street, but also looking for volunteers. So whether you want to show up and protest with me on the street, or you want to meet me on social media and talk about a topic, or you want to work during an election, those are going to be the groups that are going to help you get more involved and also teach you more about voter suppression and how to attack it.
We have some questions in the chat, starting with Crystal Edmonds. She says, in North Carolina, a 6-month lawsuit over a North Carolina Supreme Court seat challenged over 600,000 voters in our state. While the lawsuit was dropped, the new Board of Elections has now decided that overseas voters, specifically those who have never resided in the state, will have their federal choices on the ballot count, but not the state and local level. These persons may be children of military service members who have not returned to North Carolina but identified as their home. Isn't this a form of voter suppression? Is there anything that can be done to reverse this decision at the State Board of Elections?
My response to this is to wait. First of all, can you hear me clearly?
I can hear you.
Okay, great.
Can y'all hear it in the chat? I think so. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you all for the question. So yes, this is a form of voter suppression. Look into the League of Women Voters as well as the ACLU have done a lot of work when it comes to this topic, specifically as it pertains to Pennsylvania. And in following that case, it's been going on for, I think, either a year or more. They're pretty influential in what the outcomes could be. This is a form of voter suppression because, as the question was asked, when people go overseas, the challenge is basically that you no longer know the state, you no longer know the local community, so you don't know what we need, you don't know what we're voting on, you don't know who the best candidates are, etc. So your vote should not matter outside of maybe a presidential election or any other federal election. And so you create challenges to vote. And so people are less likely when they're overseas to still feel connected to their home. However, let's take, for example, the college student that decides to go to another state and to go to school out there, and they say, I'm still going to vote with a mail-in ballot for my hometown community, even though I live in this other state for school right now, because the goal is to someday return to that community, especially better than where I left it. Now, the same idea can be applicable to those who are overseas. Yes, you are in a temporary state where you are no longer living in the area, no longer living in the country. However, you grew up knowing that community. It is where you call home. You've seen it at its best. You may have seen it at its worst, and you still know what it needs. And you may not be there right now, but let's be honest with even election outcomes. I can say I want to use $2 million for a home project, for a community project to better the community, but we're not going to see the outcome of that project for, like, let's say 3 to 5 years. By that time, I plan on coming back to the community. I plan on returning. So my vote really should matter on the state and local level. To say it only matters on the federal scale makes no sense when we downsize it to the idea that local elections, those elections are going to be where we see impact first. A lot of things hit us on the federal level, of course, but the local level is where it really matters. So yes, I will, to answer your question, say that is a challenge and that is a voter suppression issue. But like I said, to dig deeper into likely the outcomes, I will look into the ACLU, League of Women Voters, who have worked on this case with Pennsylvania as well, to suggest outcomes, as well as to promote others to speak out on these issues and how long they've lived in the community and when they want to return and why they still want to vote while they're overseas. You're welcome.
Awesome. So we have another question from Dominique Taylor. Where can we find info about judges to help be informed voters?
Yeah, so it really, thank you for the question. It really depends where you live. So for example, I'm originally from Chicago. I now reside in the DMV. Back then, if you wanted to find um, nonpartisan information, Chicago Votes used to create pamphlets with nonpartisan candidate responses. They would ask them a question and then both candidates would reply. You have the same thing pop up on votes.org. And then also League of Women Voters. Those are going to be your nonpartisan forms. Now, if you want to just know any information regarding judges in the area, look at your bar associations. So lawyers usually pay into a bar association. You'll have Illinois Bar Association, Maryland Bar Association. All of these groups, these associations, will sometimes rank or side by certain judges, law clerks that they think should be reelected, and they will list the reasons for their reelection. They'll kind of star them maybe on a 4-star scale, a 5-star scale. They'll also explain what those judges' beliefs are, their partisanship, and look into just the plain bio of these judges. You can Google almost any judge out there and figure out who they voted for, if they did vote. You can figure out what associations they're a part of because they may not align with you. All of this is Google information, right? Because they're either local or federal officials that were elected, appointed, et cetera, into a position. So this is information that has to be shared with the public. You can also always be very bold and call the law clerk in the town and say, give me the judge that is in charge of all criminal courts in this area. Give me their names. I want to look up their information, and they also can just send you to any of these websites.
Okay, we have a third question from Giovanna. How can a resident of Washington, D.C. hold senators and representatives accountable?
Ooh, show up. I love these types of questions. Just show up. A lot of the times we will pick up the phone, we'll dial and say, hey, I want this elected official to do X, Y, Z. And 9 out of 10, you will not get a response back. You will wait for a call back that you'll never receive. You will show up to a town hall and they will not even address the topic. And it's because really we don't stay in their face. You're not going to respond to a mosquito until it keeps coming around you about 10 times and you keep swatting it every time. But one time it hits you, it's going to sting you, right? The one time you have to sting them is the time they're going to pay attention. It's when I keep showing up and I'm not laying off of you. It's when, whether I'm commenting under every Instagram post, every Twitter, X post, whatever they're using now. It is when I'm making hashtags and TikToks and staying in your face in order to show, hey, I'm not letting up on this topic. There are things you have not addressed. For example, out here in the DMV, a lot of federal workers were laid off due to the attacks on our federal government, right? And its employees. So for this, for example, the federal workers stood outside of agencies. They stood in front of the Capitol. They went and walked into the elected officials' offices that they can walk into at their pleasure. And they banged on the door and they said, I want to speak to you. I want to speak to you. You cannot lay off doing these things. One time is not enough. It's showing up physically. I love when, especially my generation, like I said, I'm kind of Gen Z millennial. I love when we show up because we will not leave you alone until you respond to us, right? Like we have this take it or leave it. We also have this I'm on you personality. And that's because civil unrest, especially as it's been embedded in the Black community, civil unrest is how we have gotten so much done. It is how we got through the civil rights movement. It is how during even COVID-19, we got through the Black Lives Matter movement. It's still pushing. And it's how even right now during the recent ICE arrest, it's still how other communities are responding. You have to show up, not just through the phone, not just with our prayers. We have to show up physically, ready, able, and sustain our showing up. Keep showing up until the job gets done. And like I said, if they don't get the job done, you kick them out when elections come around.
We have one that was sent earlier. How can we better explain voter ID laws and their impact?
Okay, so voter ID laws have a lot to do with economics in this country. I sort of leaned on this topic during the training, but I'm going to kind of press into it a little bit more now and tie it back. Voter ID laws and economics align because, as we've seen recently, the attacks on how much we own in property in this country, that is limiting our voices as well as our democracy. In a better explanation, this country was built on three ideals, right? Life, liberty, we used to call it the pursuit of happiness, and now we call it property, your access and your ownership of property. Property is what I have due to my finances, what I can own, and how I'm able to operate or how I'm able to live and sustain a living in this country. Well, voter ID laws coincide with this because if I need a physical ID, if I need updated information, if I need any of this, I have to be at an economic position in order to give you IDs or any other information that shows I am who I am before I vote at the polls. Let's speak about Native Americans in this country. Even those that may live on reserves or in other places, they may not believe in the same IDs that we believe in. And so economically, they may not have access to them, but also because of a belief, they have not been given those accesses. If you ask a Native American that lives on a reserve that has been there for over, let's say, 5 years on a reserve to show you their voter ID card, they're going to pull out a paper. It's going to be about this small, and it's going to have not even a full address. It will have numbers on it to describe where their reservation is. It will likely not list their actual birthday. It will not likely list their actual name. It will be something that the federal government has given them to ID them, just so it counts in the eyes of the federal government, but does not really count in the eyes of Native Americans. That is what they would use if they chose to show up and vote during an election. However, due to both economics, due to their beliefs, it is a form of suppression because their vote is always questioned in that community because their form of ID is not sufficient to what we call voter IDs that are acceptable. The same thing can be applicable to the Black community. Let's say I do not have the funds to afford a car. So I also say, I don't know how to drive, I can't afford a car, so I'm never going to get an ID. And maybe I've had a lot of backdoor jobs where I just have not had to get an ID. And that's my business. But when I want to show up to the polls, I cannot vote because I don't have the ID. I can't show you where I live, even though I'm showing you my mail. I can't show you how old I am. I can't show you any of this information. I'm not identifiable to you. Although I am identifiable when it comes to getting a job here, doing this, doing that. Those are forms of suppression. And so when it comes to fighting voter ID, it really does start with the economy first, as well as recognition of policies against beliefs. I would say beliefs when it comes to Native Americans and whether or not they have to be eligible to vote based on their form of ID. But when it comes to people like Black, African American, it's an economic issue. So when you're questioning in your community, how do we fight voter ID laws? You have to go to those politicians in your local area, and especially the Board of Elections, and say, how do we as a community make sure people show up to vote, but we don't limit them based on their access to finances and economic wealth in this area as well? It's going to be a complex question for them to answer, and they may stutter on their words, but you have to tie it in for them because those two work hand in hand.
Awesome. Thank you for that one. And then Christina said, what can we do about South Carolina? What efforts can we do of flipping South Carolina or changing how South Carolina gerrymanders?
Thank you. We spoke a little bit about gerrymandering in the training. Just to reiterate for others, gerrymandering is basically the practice of lines being drawn, district lines being redrawn to prevent a community's power from overriding another community. And I'll speak in very blunt language, maybe from Black voters, from overriding a former predominantly white community, or et cetera. So redrawing lines to limit the vote of certain voters in certain areas and produce certain outcomes of those who will win elections or policies that will win in certain areas as well, right? And so in saying that, in an area, especially in the South, as we've seen time and time again, the ways to combat that is to look at the committees of those who volunteer or are placed in positions that had the ability to draw those gerrymandering lines or to review gerrymandering lines. In previous practices, those who sit on those committees in those communities have been told they cannot have any government affiliation, they cannot be an elected official, they cannot work for the government, et cetera, if they want to be a part of redrawing district lines. However, we've also seen in times I can get paid under the table to be the one person in the room that screams out, we need to draw the line this way, and split the votes in a community. A lot of politicians that we've seen in the past, a lot of lobbying groups, they have retained power because they have been able to backdoor payment or influence in order to have lines redrawn and produce gerrymandering that helps them or their issues get across the finish line. So in areas like maybe South Carolina or other southern states, in order to stop that practice, or not stop it entirely maybe, but to at least limit it, we have to find those in the community outside of those who work for government or in elected positions that are willing to sit on those committees. It is a tedious job to sit there and to check every line and make sure it doesn't harm a community, harm an outcome of a vote, make sure they're bipartisan. People don't really want to show up and do that kind of work. It's just like when it's hard on voting day, on election day, to find people to work the polls. It's hard to find people that will work in these capacities all year long. But we have to be the ones that are willing to seek out these opportunities with our IRCs in our local community is where you can look and see how I can be placed on these committees, or what work I can do. There are also websites out there, I'm forgetting them off the top of my head. There are websites out there where you can actually log in and you can play with gerrymandering lines almost. And you can kind of Google these websites and it'll show you how it would significantly change the percentage of votes in different areas based on where I put the line, where I draw it over here, if I cut half this community off. We have to know these things and then bring that to the table through these committees. And if the people in your IRC local committee have no idea about these websites, introduce them to them, because that's a lot of the time what they don't consider when they're drawing these lines. They may consider how many people live in a community, but they may not assume the outcomes of elections when it comes to how many people in that area may vote for a woman, how many people in that area may vote for a Black person, how many people in that area care about education, etc.
I also really like to play with that gerrymandering tool in my spare time.
I'm gonna find it and let you know.
Organizing communities. We can also do another thing we can add to that is organize your communities around policies that benefit them. So call your friends and family that aren't registered to vote and like tell them why it matters. I've noticed that like when it comes to stuff like this, like I don't think people really know the severe impact of how like, yes, it impacts your vote, but it also impacts how you get funding and stuff like that. So I also think that that's one thing we can do about talking about gerrymandering with our neighbors and our friends. We have time for maybe two more questions. Anyone want to drop any in the chat?
I was gonna say the first ones were so detailed.
I have one. We talked about like college students voting on campus. How can we get a lot of college students to care about this issue? I know there are people who there are young people who vote, but I also think there's a lot of young people who don't understand about like understand the attacks on voting, especially when they go to college and they might want to vote at their dorm and they don't know how. So like how can we get young people to like bring this down to like Gen Z and young people?
Thank you. So I will speak from my own perspective and then hopefully provide some influence or response to the question. When I was in college, this was back in I started in 2014. I was trying to vote in my area. I think we were voting one year for the presidential election while I was in college one year. And the lines from the ballroom to the student center were out the door. And we were supposed to be able to vote on campus. I looked at that line and I said, I will not be late for class. What are we standing in line for? Obviously, I don't need to be here. And so I jetted off the class. Later ended up going back and later voting, but I left because I was thinking, why would I stay in line? Another instance, I was voting in a local election. My dad had me come home for the weekend. I'm voting in the local election. I'm standing in line. They, by voter suppression, cannot find me as a registered voter. This was not my first election, so I knew that was wrong. As soon as they started challenging my vote, I said, Dad, we could just go home. You could just vote. I'll wait in the hallway. And my dad, as well as the people around me, said, You won't go home. You're going to stand here. We're going to figure this out, and you're going to vote. The fight in young people, I tell the story because the fight in young people has been minimized, especially because, like you said, we have not had this fire in us where voting is our only choice. If we've seen, like during the civil rights movement, you had so many restrictions against you. So you had to show up to get access to anything. Well, in a generation of young people like myself, or those who are younger, who grew up, let me be honest, in a privileged way where we had access to many things regarding education, housing, opportunity, etc. We had more access than a lot of our elders. Because of that, we don't always remember or have that will, that drive to fight in the ways that others had to fight before. In a time where others were fighting to gain rights, we are now fighting so we don't lose them. But we have to re-express, why do those rights matter in the first place? For young people, especially when it comes to college students, I would say the best way to meet them is to show them economically how their opportunities will change from when they entered into school until when they're leaving. Right now, we see ourselves heading into a recession, right? A job that they may be looking into that paid about $70,000 getting out of school within their first 2 years might now only have X amount of opportunities in terms of placement, but also may only pay $55,000. When you show them where they're going to actually be hit in their future is when those types of things will matter. When it comes to showing those that scholarships or grants that they used to receive, programs that used to be in place at their schools may not be around for long, that's when they're going to start caring. We can't just sit and speak to young people about, hey, if you don't vote, then the sidewalk won't get fixed. Hey, if you don't vote, then you may not get your birth control. You have to show them for where they are right now, meet them where they are at, show them why it impacts them in the now, not always later, but in the now. Hey, your scholarships, your grants may get taken away. Let's look into this. This is why voting matters. Hey, your housing on campus may not exist or be able to keep up with structure because expenses may not be used in the same way they were before. this is why your vote matters. You have to meet young people where they are at.
Okay, I have two more. I answered like one. They also came in at the same exact time. I'll read the one in the chat first, and I'll go to the one in the Q&A, and then I think we might have to wrap up. You stated that we need to show up and make elected officials accountable, but many Black Americans are staying home because they are aware that this administration is waiting for us to go out in numbers. How can we encourage them to be courageous and flood the streets for our democracy?
I think this goes back to the question I kind of just answered as well, is you have to show people why it matters to them. We are, as human beings, very selfish people. I'm gonna be honest. You could say somebody else cut their arm off, and if I don't know you, I'm gonna be like, well, I'm so sorry your arm's cut off. And then I'm not gonna care like 5 minutes later because I'm not you or I'm not connected to you. We have to show people how we're connected or how what happens to one community will potentially affect another community. Let me be blunt again. A lot of what's happened in recent events when it comes to ICE has been the product of that community standing up for themselves. But we, as our community, the Black community, let's be honest, because of our biases with that community or things that have happened between the two communities, we've kind of pressed ourselves away a little bit and said, hey, we're not going to be involved in this fight. We're not going to help. We have our own Black Lives Matter fight over here. You all have your fight over here. Some of us have stepped away. And I understand there are a lot of reasons between the two groups that we've done that. But until we see, if your arm gets cut off, eventually my arm will as well. When your house is taken away, eventually my house will be taken away as well. When we start to share those parallel universes, when we start coming together a little bit more on those issues, it's when we reignite the will, like, if I don't fight with you now, I'm going to have to fight even harder later. So that's where we start, by just putting in a piece of power into play. Also, on top of that, like I said, it goes back to civil unrest. The reason Black Lives Matter movement was so prominent during a time of COVID-19, we had nothing better to do with our lives than fight. We were waking up, couldn't go to the store, people couldn't go to the club, people couldn't go anywhere but Zoom or out on the street in the open with a mask on, right? Civil unrest was shown like it has not been in decades. And that is because we had an idea that if we do not show up, we do not win. And we had nothing to lose but change in the process. And so, in saying that, going to your local officials, we can't just make it I stand at the mic at a town hall. I have to show product of civil unrest. It is, yes, showing up, but I have to make you uncomfortable. It's not until the person in power is uncomfortable that shifts can happen. So in doing that, yes, I said as young people, we can attack them on social media, etc., but start movements in your community. It is easy these days to create a Facebook event and invite the entire town to stand in front of a building and chant. I just saw a community of elderly people in Maryland the other day standing on a corner with signs that said honk for democracy, and we're speaking out. It's those little things, and they have not done that one time. They've done it 2, 3 times more. It's those little things that can count. Now, when it comes to holding elected officials really accountable, threaten their seat. It's that easy. You want to get reelected? Okay, I'm going to find the people that fund your campaign. I'm actually going to speak to those people and say, what are you doing to hold this person accountable? There were groups such as the Targets, the Walmarts, the Starbucks, the whatever. These groups were financially investing into a lot of federal politicians. And the same groups, or those at a lesser rate, may be investing into local and state officials as well. If I can find those businesses or those large individuals that invest into you, and I can threaten my support or have my community speak out against your corporation, your group, your whatever it may be that is funding a politician or anyone that is connected to something that harms me, my rights, my community, I can potentially get to you in that way as well. You have to disrupt to the point that they're scared they're going to lose their seat unless they shift. And that shift is enough. That shift that occurs economically, that is enough to make them wake up and say, oh, you're serious. And that's when they start changing their ways.
Here's our last question from Meta, and it's, what is the impact of the census on voting?
So the census is, in a nutshell, just the number of people existing in an area. Obviously not just the number, but it can also be a showing of community in terms of not nationality, race. It can be a showing of age, etc. But it's a collection of numbers in that area to show how many people are in the community, the demographics in the area, and how that's going to play a role in election outcomes or the needs of the community as well. That can affect both areas of education, so showing the investment or the population in an area, so schools that need funding, etc. It can show churches in the area at times and the domination of which churches are likely to have the more attendance, let's say Black versus brown versus white, etc. It can show a lot of things. It can show economic situations in that area as well. For the census in these day and ages, the census is used to shift as well gerrymandering lines. And I'll say that the census in itself is a test, almost like a pre-test to an election. It's a pre-test to knowing who exists in the community and what likely will come about after elections occur. So, for example, like we said in gerrymandering practices before, if I know that there are predominantly Black people in this area, ages this to this, I'm able to estimate the outcome of policies, of voters, and of an official winning as well. So I may redraw lines in order to keep that community's vote from mattering by stripping them from each other. It can be used in a positive way at times to see how many people in a community may need access to certain resources, or to keep up with that information, how many people in a community are getting helped, invested in, etc. But it can also be harmed because it can be used in very slight ways to harm communities as well by splitting where their voices matter. And that is, I think, the best way I can describe it in the time we have left.
Thank you. That was a great answer. Great questions. Thank you everyone for being present and asking really great questions. And this has been a really powerful discussion. We are only a third of the way through the summer series, which feels kind of like it's going by in a blink of an eye. And there's so much left to come. So next week we're gonna be live with Consciously, talking about how to bridge the gap between gender wars. This is a summer about taking action and making sure that change happens. So thank you for tuning in with us. Have a great rest of your night, a great weekend, and I hope to see you later. Bye.